There is a principle in Kabbalah that most have never learned, and it may explain why money comes into your life but doesn't find direction to stay. Shalom, shalom. It's good to have you here today. I want to start with something you do several times a day without ever thinking about it intentionally. You enter and exit your house, through the same door, in the same direction, with the same automatic gesture of someone who has been doing this for years without ever asking, which way am I facing when I enter? Where does my body naturally move in the first steps inside my own home? Most people have never asked this question, and the Kabbalistic tradition has a surprising answer for it. An answer that connects the direction of your body at the moment of entry with the field of receptivity that you are or are not creating for the Shefa in that space. Today we will enter a teaching that remains within the more serious circles of study of Kabbalah, about Kivun HaKnisha, the direction of entry, and about how the directional pattern that the human body establishes when crossing the threshold of the home communicates something precise to the spiritual field of that space. Not as superstition, as sacred geometry applied to the everyday. If this type of teaching resonates with you, subscribe now and activate the bell. And let me know in the comments. When you enter your house, do you turn to the right or to the left in the first steps? Or do you go straight without turning to either side? Let me tell you a parable that comes from the tradition I inherited. A story that was passed down among the wise men of certain Jewish communities when someone describes the feeling that their home did not welcome them well. Imagine a young rabbi who went to visit an older master in a distant city. When he arrived at the master's house, he observed something that stayed in his memory forever. The master, upon entering his own house after an outing, paused for a moment on the threshold. He was not praying, his lips were not moving. He was not checking anything, his eyes were half closed. He simply paused. And then he entered with a deliberate step to the right before continuing forward. The young rabbi asked afterward, "Master, what do you do at the door every time you enter?" The master replied with a question. "When you enter your house, where does your first step go?" The young man thought and admitted that he had never paid attention. The master said, "The first step inside the home is not just a physical step. It is a declaration of direction. And the direction you declare at the threshold is a direction that the space will amplify during the time you are inside." The young man asked, "And to the right, master? Why always to the right?" The master looked at him patiently and said, "Because the right is the side of giving, of opening, of chesed. When I enter through the side of chesed, I am declaring that this home is a space of receiving with openness, not of containment with fear." This parable carries today's central teaching. Today you will discover three things. First, what Kabbalah teaches about Kivun, direction, in the specific context of entering the home, and why the first steps inside the space carry a disproportionate spiritual weight compared to the following steps. Second, how the geometry of the human body at the threshold of the home connects with the map of the Sephirot that we have studied repeatedly on this channel, and why the side you turn to in the first moments of entry determines which pole of the spiritual field you are activating in the space. Third, the practical protocol of Tikkun HaKnisha, the correction of the entry, a directional awareness exercise that you can start today and that with consistent practice transforms the automatic gesture of entering the home into a deliberate act of openness for the Shefa. Let's start with the foundation. We have already studied in this channel the concept of Peh HaBayit, the mouth of the house, and how the entrance of the home is the most sensitive portal of the domestic space for the flow of Shefa. We have already studied the concept of Makom, the sacred place, and how the arrangement of objects within that space communicates to the spiritual field what is welcome and what meets resistance. Today we will take a step further, into the threshold itself, into the exact moment of crossing the threshold, and into the direction of the body at that moment. In Kabbalah, the concept of Yemin and Small, right and left, is not just anatomical. It is one of the fundamental axes of the spiritual map of reality. The right side corresponds to the Sfirot of Chesed, Chochmah and Netzach, mercy, wisdom and victory. These are the Sfirot of expansion, of opening, of flow outward and into the world. The left side corresponds to the Sphirot of Gvura, Bina and Od, strength, understanding and splendor in its face of containment. They are the Sphirot of structure, limits, discernment and protection. Both sides are necessary. The human being functions with both, and a healthy home contains energy from both poles. But the question is not which pole exists in space, it is which pole you are activating with your consciousness at the most sensitive moment of all, the moment of entry. Now let's talk about why the threshold has a specific weight that no other point in space has. In Jewish tradition, the concept of Saf, the threshold, appears in context of extraordinary spiritual importance. The Temple of Jerusalem had a Saf that the priests crossed with ritual precision. The mezuzah that we place at the entrance is fixed on the Saf, not above the door, not below, but exactly at the point of transition between the external and the internal. The Kabbalists taught that the Saf is a point of maximum permeability in physical space. It is where two fields touch, where the outside meets the inside, where the identity of space is most vulnerable to the influence of what enters. This is why the Saf requires more attention, not less. And this is why what you do in the Saf, how you cross it, in which direction, with what intention, has an amplified effect on the field of space that goes far beyond what any gesture made in the established interior could have. Think of it this way. If you want to influence the quality of a river, the most efficient point is not in the middle of its course, it is at the source. The Saf is the source of the domestic field. What enters there with conscious direction traverses the entire space. And now the direct connection to Parnassa, to the flow of prosperity. The wise observed that people in cycles of scarcity often have directional patterns at the threshold that reflect and reinforce that cycle. Whoever enters through the door and immediately turns to the left, towards the pole of Gevura, of containment, of critical evaluation, is activating a field of discernment and limit even before receiving what the home has to offer. Whoever enters and goes straight without turning to either side is crossing the threshold without a declaration of direction. The space does not receive a signal of opening or closing and tends to reflect this ambiguity over time. There is a concept in Kabbalah called Hashnasat Shefa, the introduction of Shefa into the space, the active act of bringing the flow of abundance into the home. The sages taught that Shefa does not enter passively just because the material conditions are present. It responds to intention, direction, the signal that the human being emits in the space about what is welcome. The gesture of entering from the right side, from the pole of Chesed, is one of the simplest and most powerful signs of Achnasat Shefa. It's the body telling space, I'm entering from the side of opening, from the side of receiving, from the side of mercy that allows the good to arrive before being evaluated by force. Imagine someone like Leticia, a 40-year-old woman, a teacher, who for years described her home as a space of tension rather than a space of rest. Financially, there was a persistent feeling of scarcity even when the numbers didn't fully justify that feeling. When she was introduced to this teaching and began to observe her own pattern of entry, she recognized something immediate. Every time she entered her home, her first automatic movement was to the left, straight to the kitchen, straight to check what needed to be done, straight to the pole of evaluation and task. She had never entered her home from the side of rest. She had never crossed the threshold from the pole of opening. Each entry was an entry for work, for the Gevura, for the evaluation, for what still needed to be done. The space had learned from her that when she arrived, she came to check what was wrong, not to receive what was good. When she began to practice the Tikkun HaKnisha, deliberately directing the first step to the right upon entering, what she reported was not an immediate transformation. It was an initial disorientation. The body resisted because the pattern was old. And then, gradually, a feeling that home was welcoming her differently, as if the space was responding to the new signal she had begun to emit. This is clearly an illustration, but the pattern it represents is one of the most recognizable among people who study this topic attentively. Now the central Hebrew terms for this teaching. The first is Kivun HaKnisha, the direction of the entry. The central concept of today. Not only the physical direction of the body when crossing the threshold, but the directional intention that this physical gesture carries and communicates to the field of space. The second is Saf, the threshold, the point of transition between the external and the internal. In Jewish tradition, the Saf has the status of sacred space precisely because it is the point of maximum permeability, where fields touch and where influence is more easily established. Honoring the Saf is to recognize that the point of transition deserves more awareness than the established space that comes after. The third is Yemin, right. More than an anatomical direction, Yemin is the pole of Chesed on the map of the human body and domestic space. Entering through the Yemin is to activate the pole of mercy, of openness, of generous receiving. In Jewish law, numerous actions are initiated by the right side, putting on the right shoe first, washing the right hand in Netilat Yadayim, affixing the mezuzah on the right side of the entrance. Not by arbitrary convention, but by recognition that the direction of the beginning of an action determines which pole of the spiritual field that action is activating. The fourth is Achnasat Shefa, the introduction of Shefa into the space. The active and conscious act of bringing the flow of divine abundance into the home. Not passively, waiting for the Shefa to appear, but actively, crossing the threshold in a way that declares to the field of space that the reception is intentional and welcome. And the fifth is Shimush Bigdusha, the sacred use of everyday gestures, a principle that permeates the entire Jewish tradition, that the most ordinary acts of life, when done with awareness and intention, become acts of spiritual connection. Entering the house is an ordinary act. Entering the house with Kavanah, with conscious directional intention, is Shimush Begdusha. It is transforming the everyday into the sacred without leaving the everyday. Now the complete protocol. This tikkun is called Tikkun HaKnisha, the correction of the entry, and you will practice it in 5 steps starting today, incorporating it as a permanent rhythm in your home. Step 1. Observation without judgment. For the next 2 days, before changing anything, simply observe your current pattern. Every time you enter your home, notice, where does your first step go? To the right, to the left, straight ahead? What is the first thing you check, seek, or do in the first 30 seconds inside the home? This is your current entry pattern. It is not wrong, it is simply the pattern. And seeing it clearly is the first step of the tikkun. Step 2. The pause at the threshold. Starting on the third day, every time you arrive at your home's door, whether it's the main entrance or any other entrance you regularly use, pause for 3 seconds on the threshold. Not inside, not outside, on the threshold. Close your eyes for a moment if possible. Feel that you are at the point of transition. This pause, repeated every time, begins to transform the automatic crossing into a conscious crossing. Step 3. The first step through the Yemin. After the pause at the Saf, take the first step deliberately to the right side. It can be just 1 step. Then you continue normally to where you need to go. What matters is that the first active step within the home is a step of Chesed. As you take that step, say internally, I enter from the side of the opening, the Shefa is welcome here. Step 4. The declaration of Achnasat Shefa. Still in the first moments after crossing the threshold, before checking the phone, before going to the kitchen, before any task, say quietly a phrase of reception. It can be the Modéani that we studied earlier. It can simply be Baruch Haba, blessed is the one who arrives. It can be, this home is open to the Shefa. 1 phrase, before any gesture of evaluation or task. Step 5. The conscious closing upon leaving. The tikkun of entry has a necessary pair, the tikkun of exit. Every time you leave the house, pause for a second on the threshold and say internally, I am leaving from the side of Chesed and carrying with me the field of home. This completes the cycle, entry and exit with directional awareness, and creates a continuity between the field of home and the field you take into the world. About the specific resistance of this teaching. The first resistance is practical. The door of my house does not allow me to turn right in the first steps. The hallway goes straight, or the space forces another direction. For this, the tikkun does not require that the architecture cooperate perfectly. It requires that the intention be directed towards the Yemin, even when the physical step cannot be. The intention of Chesed, declared in the Saf, is the primary element. The physical step to the right is the ideal support, but not the necessary condition. The second resistance is forgetfulness. You will enter the house 20 times in a row on autopilot before remembering the practice. This is not a failure, it is the old pattern showing its strength. When you remember, resume. There is no broken ritual, there is only a moment of return to consciousness. And each return in itself is already tikkun. The third resistance is the feeling that such small gestures cannot have a real effect. A step to the right, a 3-second pause, a softly spoken phrase. How can this change something as concrete as prosperity? For this resistance, the teaching has an answer that comes from the very structure of creation. The world was created with a word. Shabbat is established with the lighting of a candle. The soul returns to the body by the act of opening the eyes. The deepest tikkun often resides in the simplest gesture, because the simple, done with kavana, has a reach that the complex without consciousness will never have. Today you learn that the threshold of your home, the Saf, is the point of maximum permeability of the domestic field, and that the direction of your body in the first steps of entry determines which spiritual pole you are activating in the space. You understood the difference between entering through the Yemin, through the pole of Chesed, of openness and receiving, and entering through the small or without direction, activating contraction before having received. You became acquainted with the 5 central terms, Kivun Aknisha, Saf, Yemin, Achnasat Shefa, and Shimush Bekdusha. And you now have the Tikkun Aknisha, 5 steps to transform the automatic gesture of entering the house into a deliberate act of openness to the Shefa. If you practice and notice something, a different feeling when entering the house, a new quality in the space after a few days of conscious practice, a perception that the home is responding differently to the new signal you are emitting, I would love to hear. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It can simply be, I started pausing at the threshold and feel different when I enter. This is already Saf being honored. Share in the comments. And now, before you go, I want to bless you. May the Eternal, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bless every crossing of your Saf, every entrance and every exit of your home. May the Yemin of His mercy be the pole through which you always enter, from the side of the opening, from the side of receiving, from the side where Shefa finds fertile ground to land. May your home learn from every Tikkun Aknisha you practice to become a space of Achnasat Shefa, where what is good enters easily, settles with stability, and remains fruitful. May the Shimush Bekdusha of your everyday gestures transform the ordinary into the sacred without you needing to live your real life to find the spiritual. And that every time you cross the threshold on the side of Chesed, you remember that you are practicing the same teaching that the sages have passed down from generation to generation, and that this chain of wisdom now also runs through you. May it be so. Amen. If this teaching reached you at the right moment, leave a like. It helps the channel reach more people seeking this type of wisdom. Subscribe and activate the bell. And share with someone you feel always enters the house from the wrong side, not just physically. Next week, we will finally arrive at the teaching about Ayin Tov, the good eye, and how the way you look at the prosperity of others is directly shaping the channel of your own Shefa. A teaching that will challenge something very deeply rooted. Don't miss it. Until then, Shalom.